In 1925, a man in a tailored suit invited 6 scrap metal dealers to a private meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon in Paris. He introduced himself as a Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He told them the Eiffel Tower was too expensive to maintain. The government wanted to sell it quietly, for scrap. One of those dealers wrote a check, and then 6 months later, in the same hotel, a different dealer wrote another one. Con artists are supposed to be desperate people working the margins, back alleys, 3-card Monte on street corners. These 4 were not that. These 4 walked into rooms full of experts, scientists, journalists, and government officials, told lies so enormous they should have collapsed under their own weight, and watched as everyone in the room nodded along. Victor Lustig arrived in Paris in the spring of 1925 with a newspaper clipping. The article mentioned that the Eiffel Tower was rusting, expensive to maintain, and that some officials considered it an eyesore that had outlived its purpose. Most people read that article and moved on with their day. Lustig read it and saw a business opportunity. He had fake government stationery printed. He rented a suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, the most expensive hotel in Paris, because a real government official would never conduct business anywhere cheap. He invited 6 scrap metal dealers to a confidential meeting, told them the tower was being sold quietly to avoid public outrage, made them sign non-disclosure agreements, gave them a tour of the tower itself, pointing out rust spots and structural concerns with the confidence of a man who had inspected it 100 times. He identified his mark immediately, André Poisson, the least established dealer in the room, the one who seemed nervous, the one who wanted this contract more than anyone else because it would make his career overnight. Lustig let Poisson win the bid. Then he added one final touch. He hesitated. He hinted that his government salary was modest. Poisson understood. He paid a bribe on top of the purchase price. The bribe is what made it feel real, because a legitimate government official asking for a quiet kickback was the most believable part of the entire scheme. Lustig took the money and left for Vienna. He watched the Paris newspapers every day, waiting for the story to break. It never did. Poisson was too humiliated to go to the police. So 6 months later, Lustig went back to Paris and did the entire thing again with a new set of dealers. The second buyer was less embarrassed. He called the police, but by then Lustig was already gone. 4,000 miles west, the con was cruder but no less effective. Cardiff, New York, October 1869. A farmer named William Newell hires 2 men to dig a well behind his barn. 3 feet down, they hit something solid. They keep digging. What emerges from the mud is a 10-foot stone man, a giant, lying on his back, face frozen in an expression of mild discomfort. Within hours, people are lined up to see it. Newell charges 50 cents a head. Within days, scientists arrive. Some declare it a petrified prehistoric human, proof that giants once walked the earth. Others say it is an ancient statue carved by Jesuit missionaries centuries ago. Both camps are wrong. It is a block of gypsum, carved in a Chicago warehouse 4 months earlier, shipped by rail to Cardiff, and buried behind the barn at night. The man behind it was George Hull, Newell's cousin. Hull was an atheist who had gotten into an argument with a Methodist minister about Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days. Hull spent nearly $3,000, the equivalent of about $70,000 today, to win that argument. He commissioned the statue, had it aged with acid and darning needles to simulate pores, buried it, waited a year, and then told his cousin to dig a well in that exact spot. P.T. Barnum offered $50,000 to buy the giant. Newell refused. So Barnum commissioned his own replica and displayed it in New York, telling audiences that his was the real one and the Cardiff version was the fake. For a brief period, there were 2 fake giants competing for the same paying audience, and the public could not tell which fake was more authentic. Hull eventually confessed to a newspaper. The paying public kept coming anyway. 34 years earlier, an entire city was staring at the moon. August 1835. the New York Sun publishes a front-page article claiming that Sir John Herschel, a real astronomer, the most famous in the world at the time, had built a new telescope in South Africa powerful enough to see the lunar surface in extraordinary detail. The first installment describes basalt formations and lush vegetation. The second adds rivers and herds of bison-like creatures. By the third installment, the paper reports the discovery of bipedal creatures with bat-like wings, approximately 4 feet tall, living in temples made of sapphire. The Sun's circulation became the highest of any newspaper on Earth. Other papers reprinted the articles. The story reached Europe. Yale scientists reportedly sent a delegation to track down Herschel's original research paper. They could not find it because it did not exist. The real Herschel was in South Africa. He had no idea any of this was happening. When he finally heard about it months later, he reportedly found it funny until people started asking him serious follow-up questions about the bat people. The Sun never printed a retraction, never admitted it was fabricated. The author, almost certainly a reporter named Richard Adams Locke, never confirmed his involvement during his lifetime. The newspaper simply moved on to other stories, and its readership stayed. The con worked because people wanted bat-winged moon creatures to be real more than they wanted to check. And then there was a man who faked an entire country. London, 1704. A young man with blonde hair introduces himself to English society as a native of Formosa, the island now called Taiwan. His name, he says, is George Psalmanazar. He has written a book. It describes Formosan culture in extraordinary detail, an alphabet of 20 characters, a calendar system, a religion involving the annual sacrifice of 18,000 young boys to the gods, a diet that includes raw meat and occasionally human flesh, and a legal system where murderers are hung upside down and shot with arrows. None of it is true, not a single word. Psalmanazar has never been to Formosa. He has never been east of France. He is almost certainly French, though no one ever determined his real name or his real hometown. He is invited to lecture at Oxford. He dines with members of the Royal Society. Jesuit missionaries who have actually been to Formosa challenge him publicly. He accuses them of only visiting the Dutch-controlled coastal areas and never penetrating the interior where the real culture exists. The audience sides with him. He maintains the deception for years. His book goes through multiple editions. He becomes a minor celebrity. Eventually, decades later, after he has quietly abandoned the persona and become a respectable London editor, he writes a confession. It is published after his death. In it, he cannot bring himself to reveal his actual name. Even in confession, the man who invented a country could not bring himself to become a real person. Samuel Johnson, the most celebrated intellectual in England, called him the most impressive man he had ever met. A scrap metal dealer paid for the Eiffel Tower and was too embarrassed to tell anyone. A 10-foot gypsum statue fooled scientists for months. A newspaper invented bat people on the moon and became the most widely read publication on Earth. A Frenchman convinced Oxford he was from Taiwan. None of these cons required advanced technology. None of them required weapons. They required one thing, the knowledge that people will believe what they want to believe, and they will pay for the privilege. What are you believing right now that costs you nothing to check? Subscribe and hit the bell. Next episode, scientists tried to rip its face off because they thought it was fake. Bare bones. Simple stories about the weirdest things that actually happened.